Okay, recently Canada failed. I shouldn't say they failed. Canada just got the report card from the UN on on the Human Rights Committee and stuff like that. There was 13 categories. Canada failed 5 of them, namely the murdered and missing Indigenous women, Bill C-51, gender equality. That's stuff like the wage pay gap, business and human rights, particularly in the mining industry, and we failed on the detention of migrants and asylum seekers.
That's right.
I've got Kailee Brennan. She's the program manager of the Matthew House in Ottawa. They deal with refugee claimants there, and we're going to talk about it. Ready for this?
Ready.
Hi, Kailee.
Hi.
Okay, what I want to know first of all, when a refugee comes here,
yeah,
what's the process like? Like, what happens to them?
So there is a couple of different categories of refugees. Maybe a government-sponsored refugee has a really different situation than a refugee claimant that I deal with in Ottawa.
Yeah.
What you guys would see here is primarily government-sponsored refugees. So their case is essentially decided before they ever get here. But for me and people that come and seek asylum in Canada, they get off of the plane and they make a claim for refugee status with the government, and then they're given a 2-month period of time in which they prepare for a legal hearing, a case that they have to present, and kind of like prove their refugee.
So these people, like, nobody knows they're coming. They just get here.
No, that's right.
That's
they
the
come
idea.
on their own.
What happens in an airport if I show up in Canada and I'm from another country without proper identification, and I just show up and say, look, I'm a refugee?
Yeah, a few different things can happen. So with no ID documents, or maybe you came on some kind of false passport, that can result in detention of asylum seekers, which is something
jail.
That they go to jail.
For how long?
So for example, I had a refugee claimant who first arrived in Vancouver, and he arrived on a false passport. He's from Nigeria. And upon arriving and not being able to prove his identity or tie it back to the false papers that he was put in a maximum security prison in Vancouver for 5 months.
That's pretty hard for a guy who's not necessarily a criminal.
And actually, interestingly as well, after he completed his legal process, he was found to be a convention refugee according to the definition. So he was a genuine refugee.
Really?
But he spent his first 5 months in Canada in
maximum security prison.
Yeah, he told me, people told me Canadians were nice, but when I first came to Canada, I learned that if I have drugs, they'll give me food.
I would imagine that's the same everywhere, not just Canada.
Yeah.
I think he's incriminating himself by saying he had drugs in prison. So they just throw them in jail because he didn't have ID. That's it. That's the okay. Understand. I can understand why you would want to detain them first, maybe not in a maximum security prison, but you'd want to get to the bottom why you don't have ID.
That's right.
We need to know who you are.
Yeah.
But a lot of times when people come over, they don't have ID because they had to actually use a fake ID to get here.
A lot of people come on false passports.
That happens a lot.
Because they didn't have access to a passport office in Mogadishu, Somalia.
Right. And do they detain children too? Like with the parents?
Sometimes with the parents, sometimes separately from the parents.
Oh, I don't know what's worse. Well, I suppose, I guess if you're the parent, you would rather be detained with your child than detained separately. Yeah. I
think they have made a lot of changes or are trying to move away from that because it's like so internationally frowned upon, but it does happen.
So in 2012, the Canadian government cut funding in some area in healthcare particularly healthcare, which is strange because we're kind of in like a refugee crisis.
There's a lot of refugees out there.
How was your business affected by that?
So in 2012, they did cut all basic health care that refugee claimants can receive. So once they've arrived and they are kind of living in my shelter for their first couple of months and we're sorting through some of the legal process, it essentially meant that they couldn't access a doctor at all. Unless they had a communicable disease. So if they were going to like endanger Canadians, then we would treat them.
So it was like vaccines and that's it?
Yeah. Not even vaccines, actually, I don't think.
Not even?
We would wait till they like got something.
Really?
And then we would treat it. So essentially they couldn't, if they needed to like see a doctor, like you or I would go to a walk-in clinic.
Yeah.
And we can do that because we have health cards from the province. But refugees have always been considered a responsibility of the federal government. And so those cuts, previously healthcare had been covered by the federal government for them, and then they cut those things.
Right. So it's not that there's confusion between provincial and federal government.
No, it was like an actual just like cutting of responsibility.
Right. Okay, but that's been changed now.
So recently, in 2012, when they made these cuts, what they hoped to see was that they would save billions of dollars on this healthcare that they were spending, and instead what happened is people just waited until they were quite sick to access any kind of healthcare. So they would end up in the emergency rooms where the costs are astronomically higher, and the province would pay that bill instead. So this caused outrage for a number of people, politicians in the provincial government and doctors and lawyers. So in this past year, 2014, in November, the Supreme Court actually overturned that decision and said it was unconstitutional and cruel treatment. It is.
Well, it's cruel treatment for sure, and it actually, I looked into it last night. It actually is unconstitutional.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah.
So then before the cuts were enacted, is this the detaining of people? Is that all in relation to the cuts?
No, it's two separate issues, but it has to just do with the way that certain governments have approached the way that we respond to refugees. So detention is kind of one area that's been an issue, and healthcare is another area. So we have overturned some of those cuts, but they've made it so there's a grid of who's able to access care and how it works. So most doctors that you'll still call, and I've called many in the last couple months, and have explained I have a refugee claimant, they are covered under the interim federal health plan, can they access your facility? And they'll say oh, actually it's kind of confusing, we don't really know how to bill it, so we just it's not our mandate, we won't see them.
Right.
So most people are still not able to access,
even though they're
technically covered. It's created just so much confusion for people.
How do you think we can clear that confusion up? Aside from this video, we can start a hashtag movement.
I think it's primarily about educating people too. Often when I have to interact with those healthcare professionals, I'll say I'll ask can you call your financial department? And once we can sort that out, just an awareness of oh, it's actually billed through Blue Cross and it's really simple. This is my client's number.
Right.
And it's
so hold on, you're saying it's not, it actually isn't difficult for them to find out.
You can Google it and find out how to bill. It's so easy.
It's almost laziness. I want to say
you said it.
I said it. Okay. So what would you like to see changed?
As far as healthcare, or just
as far as the whole program, to make this.
Yeah.
Because obviously, I think we're on the same side. We would like to see tax money going to help refugees.
Yep. It's difficult to say. There's just a general negative attitude, I think, towards refugees, and it's been more prominent in the last couple of years.
Specifically the Muslims, right? There's a lot of anti-Muslim rhetoric.
For sure there is. And there is definitely, even some of our politicians kind of in the federal government have made distinctions between a genuine refugee and a bogus refugee. And sometimes...
What's a bogus refugee?
Well, maybe someone who doesn't deserve Canada's protection. So a claimant that comes here and makes their case, and their case is denied, which would eventually end in deportation.
Do you know does this happen a lot? Yeah?
It does happen. It does happen for sure.
And is it mostly Muslims it happens to?
No, not necessarily. They they need to be able to substantiate that they do have a fear of persecution, and if they can't do that, then that will result in a negative decision. So it doesn't have to do with their religious affiliations, hopefully.
That's good. Okay. Kailee Brennan. She is the program manager at the Matthew House in Ottawa. They work with refugee claimants. Boy, you on the side of Babylon, trying to front like you're down with Mount Zion.